Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to come back to the need to urgently act on the housing crisis. I'd like the Parliamentary Secretary to understand why I'm coming back to this. First of all, because the number of people living unsheltered in my community have tripled in the last 3 years, from just over 300 to over 1,000. As well, homes continue to become less affordable. Dating back to 2005, for example, it used to be that house prices were 3 times average median income. Fast forward to today, and now they're 8 times as much, completely out of reach for the average person, while the wait list for a one-bedroom affordable unit is now almost 8 years. This housing crisis will continue to define my community as it already has, whether it's a young person, unsure if they'll ever be able to move out of their parents' place, a senior living on a fixed income, or a healthcare worker, as they continue to tell me that, a nurse I spoke with a few weeks ago who said, I'm not sure I'll be able to continue to live in our community at all. It's clear that across all levels of government, we need urgent action. At the federal level, that's both investing at the rates that are required to build the units we need, while also addressing the underlying conditions that have led us to this crisis. Because the fact is, homes should be places for people to live and not commodities for corporate investors to profiteer from. If you're some corporate investor, you want to make a bunch of money, go invest in the stock market, but don't do it on the backs of low-income folks in my community. Multiple studies show that one very reasonable measure that would help is to remove existing tax exemptions by one type of corporate investor, real estate investment trusts. Back in 1996, for example, these REITs didn't own any rental units across the country. Today, it's nearly 200,000. In fact, institutional investors across the country, they don't fully disclose the number of units, but we know it's somewhere between 20 to 30% of purpose-built rental housing stock. In my community and across the country, what we're seeing is these real estate investment trusts buy up affordable units, quickly raise rents, and then make it more difficult for renters to afford a place to call home. These corporate investors are in it not for what they can contribute, but for what they can take out, the largest return possible. So it seems pretty reasonable to tax them appropriately and to invest the funds in affordable housing. That's exactly what a motion I've put forward in this House, Motion 71, would do. When I last raised this motion with the Minister of Housing, the reply I got is that the governing party needs to study it more. Well, the good news is that the studies have already been done. It was done by the Office of the Federal Housing Advocate, recommended by them. There was another study by the Shift in their directives. Locally in my community, a study done by the Social Development Center of Waterloo Region, and as a result, groups across the country, from Citizens for Public Justice, Canada Without Poverty, the alternative federal budget being proposed by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, the National Right to Housing Network, all of which are making this same recommendation to remove this tax exemption from real estate investment trusts, and in the words of the motion, to then put the funds towards affordable units. And so my question is, knowing that the studies have already been done, knowing that civil society is recommending this change, will it be in the fall economic statement tomorrow? And if not, why not?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Diversity and Inclusion.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is always a pleasure to hear from other parties in the House who agree with us on the need to increase the number of housing units available and also increase affordability. This is something that all levels of government, the private sector, the not-for-profit sector as well, must be involved in to be able to make housing more affordable. There are too many people in Canada who are having a hard time paying for housing. They have a hard time finding housing that meets their needs and that provides the dignity of having a safe and affordable roof over their heads. There is just not enough supply to meet demand. The government set up a number of programs as part of the National Housing Strategy to increase the number of housing units available. But as my colleague highlighted, Supply is only one of the factors that increases the price of housing. There's speculation, commercialization as well. There are increasing prices artificially, and that means that the prices are no longer related to the true value of the housing itself. And there's also the renoviction phenomenon, and that is why we have a yearly 1% tax on vacant properties that belong to non-Canadians and non-residents of Canada. That's also why we have adopted a legislation to prevent foreigners from purchasing property in Canada for 2 years. We want to make sure that housing is used for a purpose, which is to provide housing to people who need it. Earlier this year, we wanted to examine the assets that belong in the property market, and we wanted to see how many occupants also there are in housing in Canada, because we want to have measures to protect owners and renters. We want to also make the property purchasing process more open and transparent, and we want to have measures to fight illegal measures in the housing market, as well as measures for a quick resale, to ensure that quick resale and speculation is curbed. Madam Speaker, affordable housing is a priority for this government. It has been since the first time it was elected, and it will continue to be a priority. It was the cornerstone of our 2022 budget that proposed measures to deal with this problem in all ways possible that could have an impact. I would like to thank my colleague for his question and for giving me the opportunity to talk about housing once again. This is a shared responsibility, and we all need to work together to ensure that all Canadians have access to affordable housing. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the Parliamentary Secretary for her response. I think it's important to highlight again, what I'm raising here is not that the governing party is doing nothing. There is more nuance than that. What I'm raising is that the measures that are being put in place are insufficient. Again, I'll highlight, in my community, the number of people living unsheltered has tripled in the last 3 years, and so it's clear that more needs to be done. In her response, the Parliamentary Secretary again cited this study that's being done, and so I'd like to again highlight for her that others have already done the work. These studies have already been done, and in those studies, one of the obvious recommendations that I think parliamentarians from all parties could agree on is that these corporate investors should at least be paying their taxes. And that if they did, we could use those funds to invest in affordable units. Would she address that substance of the motion I've put forward on the floor of this House, or help understand why this is not being undertaken by the governing party?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for having repeated the fact that, yes, we do need to do more. That's exactly what we have committed to do. We are committed to take more action to make housing more affordable. The plans that we announced in the spring budget acknowledge the complexity of the problem by attacking it from many angles. We are going to increase supply. We are going to tackle financialization and speculation in the housing sector, and then some. We will continue to prioritize housing, just like we've done since our very first election to government. I'm happy to know that the member for Kitchener Centre shares our concern and interest in housing, and I hope we'll be able to count on the support of all members in this House when we continue to work together for a better and more equitable housing system.